Hey Coco, it's so lovely to speak to you again. How are you going? How is lockdown?
Lockdown is interesting. I found myself at the beginning feeling super productive, super yeah, I work from home all the time. So what difference does it make now that I'm forced to be at home? This is fine. I'm going to thrive. And I really had that um, with me for about, I'd say maybe 5 weeks.
Yeah,
And then like it just flipped and I was like, I can't
amazing.
make art and I'm so dumb and I'm rubbish and da 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 da. And so
Yeah,
I was in that space for like 3 weeks after that
yeah.
of really beating myself up about, not doing the things that I would usually do. And then over the
Mm.
past few weeks, I've kind of come to grips with the fact that this is not normal. This is not the same as when I choose to work from home.
Yeah, I mean, I heard this term the other day that really, like, I thought exemplified just how I feel. It's like we're not working from home, we're people in the middle of a pandemic trying to work.
Exactly.
Like, because it is. And I think as artists, we're always told, oh, you work alone, or especially as, writer creatives, it's
Yeah.
like we work best by ourselves, we can be hermits, we do that, but we're
But
not
it
choosing 3 months of this.
feels like it's the same thing every day.
Yeah.
So because there's nothing new, even if it's the small things like, seeing a different bird, for example,
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
like something that happens in your everyday life, because nothing feels like it's changing, it's
Mm.
so hard to want to write about that and to want to creatively kind of explore that.
And especially, I think like the time thing is a thing. I mean, I structure my day around the time that my plants come out. So, for instance, like I'll have my work plant, and then that goes away at nighttime, and the fun plant comes out.
That is something that across all of my friends is the thing that really kind of has messed with everyone, is like, what day is it? And
Mm.
luckily in the beginning of lockdown I had like my regular therapy sessions on Fridays, and I post a newsletter called The Other Poets every Tuesday. So I kind of had those two things anchoring me
Mm.
every week, where I would go and on the Tuesday I send out the newsletter, which is completely free, anyone can sign up to it, but it's just something that I send out every Tuesday. And then I had therapy on Fridays, and then my therapist got unwell, so we had to stop our sessions, and that was a weird sort
Yeah.
of thing where it was like, oh, I don't have that anchor anymore of what day is it. So I'm trying to learn new ways of doing that.
But I think it's really interesting. I feel like COVID has really brought to the forefront this idea of mental health. I mean, we've all been, it's been on the agenda now for a while, but I feel like now everyone is actually dealing with it. I mean, how have you found the conversations around mental health and COVID?
I found them really interesting actually, because yeah, like you said, a lot of people who maybe weren't so active in looking after their mental health or weren't really thinking about it, you now kind of are forced to deal with it.
Mm.
Like there is nothing else you can do
Yeah.
every single day other than be with yourself, and no matter how many things you can fill your time with, like you are always there. And so I've found that a lot of people have actually started to, all of a sudden I feel really lonely, or all of a sudden I feel really sad or really anxious, and because of COVID and because of the lockdown, and they've had to kind of, yeah, like do the work to look into that and to explore what that means for them and all those
Mm.
things. And I think, and
Yeah.
so for me, not much has changed in my awareness of it,
Yeah.
but a lot has had to change in the way that I look after myself and the way that I deal with it. And I have all of these self-care techniques and all of these like useful tools, but
Mm.
nothing has prepared me for feeling like I'm not good at the thing I love doing,
Yeah.
you know.
Wow.
Um, so I've kind of found it interesting because I'm learning a lot more about myself, but
Mm.
also kind of scary,
Yeah.
because you're learning a lot more about yourself in your
Mm.
house with, like with this whole weird pandemic thing
Yeah.
happening, and there are some mechanisms and techniques that I would have used before that I can't necessarily use now because, I can't go and see a friend.
Yeah.
All of those things that really kind of held you and centered you are now gone. But because I've been doing it for so long, I didn't even notice that they were the things that centered me and helped me and,
Yeah.
that made me feel worthwhile.
And you're opening yourself up to yourself, like being vulnerable. Like, we talk about so much being vulnerable to another person or to friends. But what if we're vulnerable to ourselves? And how do we self-care?
Something that I've had to come to terms with, and it's really something that I have to work on every day, is the idea that it's okay to not be productive. You have to rest and you have to give yourself a break, and you have to treat yourself like you would treat your best friend in a situation like this. There are days where I feel so low that I literally cannot even answer an email from my bed.
Yeah.
And so I'd end up having those sort of days, beating myself up about it for the whole day, and then spending the next day trying to like pull myself out of this hole and get back to work.
Yeah.
Actually, you would probably tell your best friend, hey, it sounds like you need to spend the day watching something on TV or, through Netflix or whatever.
Yeah, binge watch Killing Eve. Go for it. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, it seems like today you just kind of need to stay in your pajamas and kind of mope about the house a bit, and that's okay.
So this pandemic has obviously become so much more heightened with everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter and with George Floyd and everything that happened in America. And I guess there's so many conversations happening at the moment, which is fantastic. And I guess mental health, where do you see that coming into the conversation? And is it coming into the conversation?
I don't know if it is coming into the conversation. And I think it's definitely something that needs to be there. I think it has worth that people talk about it and are aware of their own mental health and how to look after themselves, especially Black people in a time like this where not only is there COVID-19, that virus, you've also got racism as a virus that is taking, its toll. And I think because of all of that, it's just too much. It's just so much. And I can't imagine how some of the people who are kind of leading marches or creating events and stuff, how they're looking after themselves and how their mental health must be to be so in the forefront of things, as well as, the families of people who are being murdered around the world and how, their mental health is. I think in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black community, we're getting better at talking about mental health. There's a lot of stigma that comes with it, and there's a lot of sort of myths and thoughts that have been passed through generations about mental health and getting therapy and stuff like that. But I really do think that a lot of the more contemporary artists now are making work about their own mental health and talking about it. But specifically, thinking about the Black community, I think it's one of these things where we just have to kind of throw all of the things that we thought away, all of the sort of, things that like my grandma might say of, what have you got to be sad about? Like, you have a great life, like life's too short to be sad, and all these other things. About
just smile.
Just smile, exactly. And it's fair because I can only imagine what my ancestors went through. So, they did what was best for them, but times are changing and we have the tools to look after ourselves and things like that. And I think it's something that really needs to be spoken about.
And a lot of your work does deal with the racial politics of mental health. And I guess have you, what journey have you gone on, especially like with Black Lives Matter at the moment? Have you discovered something else about yourself or your art that you want to express more?
My art does explore it a lot, and actually my last show, Grey, is pretty much about my mental health journey as well as Black women's mental health and how that's seen different from other groups of people and their mental health. In Grey, there's a moment where I'm talking to the other character about kind of being okay with depression and needing it and just accepting it. And at the time, that was very, very right. Whereas now, it's less about accepting it and more about going, if you're going to be here, you're going to do it on my terms. And that's something that's really interesting and has made me want to go back to the work that I've made and look at it again and go, okay, well, how do I feel about that thing now? Or is there more to be said? That has the opportunity to be developed. So during COVID and with the Black Lives Matter movement being really in the forefront of everyone's minds right now, especially mine, it's made me want to go back to my work and go, okay, well, do I still feel this way? Or, you know, is there another way that I can look at it? Or what have I learned since writing that piece? You know?
Yeah. So I guess you see your art as more of a living document, because some people as well, they'll kind of be like, this is where I was at this particular moment, and that's pure, and so I leave that. But do you kind of take the other approach of, no, it's a work in progress always, almost?
The honest answer is it's kind of both. It's kind of like, I will never look back at my first two plays and be like, take them off the shelves, nobody should see this, like it's of its time, nothing like that. But for example, in the first show, there's a moment where I name some of the people who were murdered due to being alive while Black. Since I wrote those people's names, there's a bunch more that have been added to the list. So things like that, you know, things like that, I would kind of go back and edit, and maybe when I'm doing it live, I'll add a few more names because there are more names and they deserve to be said, you know?
Yeah.
But I also think about in the far future, so in, I don't know, 5 years or something like that, looking back at the work and doing like a 2.0 version of it. Like, what is all of the things that I've said in that play? Where does that sit with me now? What is the truth in that? What doesn't feel right? What has happened since then that is relevant to this piece of work?
The response of the arts industry, which has been very largely positive, how have you found this response? Because I've heard many artists say, well, this theatre didn't support me back then, or didn't support artists back then, but now suddenly they are.
How can I say this? Within the Black community, we know who's had our backs from before it became popular to have our back, you know? So we're not stupid. Like, you can't just come and support it with one black tile on your Instagram page and then be like, yep, we've done the work. It's not going to play. We don't run that game. So, you know, we see these companies and organizations doing this, and we're like, okay, put your like money where your mouth is, put your seats at the table where your mouth is, put your board of trustees where your mouth is, like, make those big changes. And I'm quite vocal about stuff like that, where I see companies or organizations supporting the movement but not actually supporting Black artists. And and I will tell them, as well as like other Black artists do, we see you. This isn't, you don't get to jump on because it's cool, you know. In the same way that when there are influencers who come to marches, take their photos and then go home, we see what you're doing. You're not fooling us, we can see you. Like, we have been seeing you.
Yes. This is not just a hashtag. And that's what I'm really worried about is going to happen, that people are going to hashtag this, feel like they're going to do something, that is enough. And that's not enough, and that's not okay.
And I think that companies and organizations really need to remember that not only can we see what they've put out and done in the past, we're also now watching you a bit more to see if you're gonna do anything in the future, see if you're gonna really put in the work. Like, it's not easy. It's not easy to support work by Black artists when your whole organization is built on the work of white artists. you know, when it's built on the backs of 40 mediocre white male playwrights. It's not easy, but no one's going to cry for you. Just do it. Like,
Yeah, you know, with a lot of your pieces, a lot of your work, you use a lot of humor when you deal with issues around race. And do you find humor? How do you find that? Is it playful? Is it your playful side?
yeah, it really is. Like, I talk about a lot of, you know, honest, true to me things that some people, you know, hear and they kind of go, how can you share that? Like, that's so personal. Like, yeah, it's so honest. How can you do that every night? And actually it's because one, I've lived it. I've already gone through all the pain that I'm telling you about. But two, it's because I put this sort of, I don't know, you know what it is? I don't even think I'm being funny. I'm just really being me. And I'm
Yeah.
quite, you know, nervous and my brain jumps from thought to thought. And so it's that sort of, I'm just going to talk. And yeah, I might say some things that feel very heavy, but that's okay. We don't need to let them weigh us down. So yeah, so I guess my delivery is funny, um, but I think it's just me chatting to people. And it's also, you know, there's definitely a small part of it that's like a defense mechanism or like a safety blanket for me, but
Mm.
also for the other person or for the people who are watching the shows. You know, I never want to put someone in danger or trigger somebody or make them feel unsafe while watching my work. So I really want, you know, you as an audience member to know that it's okay, I'm still here. I can tell you these things and we can laugh about them together. I'm giving you permission to do that, but don't worry. I'm doing this so that you don't worry about me, you know?
Mm. It's a great in for an audience. It's like, okay, we feel comfortable that we can go on this journey with you, even when it's really, really hard hitting and very truthful, which is very brave and why I really admire your work. As you know, although I might start sounding like your fangirl, but in your piece Grey, you work really closely with a BSL interpreter. And I'm really interested to know kind of how was that process and what gave you that inspiration?
Yeah, well, actually, Grey is BSL integrated. So, what that means is that it's a play that has two characters in it.
Mm.
One character, myself, um, speaks in English and sings, and the other character's language is British Sign Language, and that's how we communicate. So it's not so much that she's an interpreter, it's that her character speaks in BSL, and so therefore in the show, in the same way that English is integrated and music is integrated, British Sign Language BSL is integrated.
Amazing.
I was really fortunate to work with Sapphire Joy, who is a hearing actress who, I don't know if she's fluent, but she is definitely really close to being qualified fluent in British Sign Language.
Mm.
And then I also worked with some coders. So a coder is a child of a deaf adult. So I worked with Grace, who is a brilliant qualified interpreter, but British Sign Language is also her first language. But she's hearing, so she kind of came in and had that connection of, okay, well, as a hearing artist who understands British Sign Language, what works, what makes sense, or does it jar and stuff like that. And then we also had Vilma Jackson, who is a deaf actress who came in and kind of looked at the way that we used sign language together and what actual signs we would use for certain things. And we also had a musician called Sign Kid, who is a deaf rapper. And so he came in and he worked with like the musicality. So it was really important that when we were working with BSL, it wasn't somebody standing at the side of the stage signing. It was so integrated. And in the same way that as a hearing person, I can hear the music, we wanted to do that visually with sign language when things were coming in to the play. So like when a drum beat was added, for example, you know, we wanted to make sure that people could see that and could understand what that felt like if you were unable to hear it.
Yeah.
So we had like a really great team of hearing and deaf artists who like, yeah, really leveled the whole show up.
Mm.
And I feel so fortunate to have been able to work with all of them on this and to pick up that expertise and and to just be able to play with language and with other artists and all of those sort of things. So it was really fun and it also just felt really important as well.
For all these emerging artists out there who might be struggling, or for people who are in lockdown, kind of looking at these videos and looking for creative inspiration, what advice would you give?
I would say remember that time is a lie. That, and by that I mean, at the beginning of this year, I sat down and was like, great, so this year I'm going to make 2 shows, I'm going to tour, let's put that into action, I'll do this, these are my deadlines. Like, I was very structured, and then COVID happened and all that gets pushed out the window, and it's like, my first reaction was, I'm never going to be able to do this, there is too much to do and there's no time, and I don't know when we're going to be out of lockdown and blah 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 blah. But actually, just because I had planned to do 2 shows this year and to go on tour, it doesn't mean that it can't happen next year or the year after. It's okay to push back your plans. That project will happen. But actually, to say that my second tip would actually be, give yourself deadlines and make yourself accountable. Because I think, there's a lot of power in being able to go, okay, I'm overwhelmed right now, I can't do this right now, but there are some things that you need to get done. There are some things that you need to do. So yes, you will have to answer those emails eventually, but give yourself a deadline and something that is focused. So I'm going to answer 3 emails by 12 noon tomorrow. That's doable. Give yourself that deadline. Or I was supposed to write a show this year and that hasn't happened because the project got messed up. But what I'm going to do is give myself personal deadlines to complete that show so that it still happens and that I'm not stagnant and it doesn't just stop, So so those are like my kind of keeping yourself going, but also allowing yourself to stop tip. During lockdown and being in a lockdown, my kind of third tip would be to find your tribe. And for me, a tribe is a group of people who want the best for you, who understand you, who, want to be there next to you. They're your peers, they're your, and it doesn't matter what age or race or whatever, it's just people that get you for who you are. And I think it's also really important to make sure that for people like us who are writers and artists, it's very important to have people as part of your tribe who don't work in your industry, who don't get it. Because, I can talk to certain people about what's happening in theatre and they will understand, but it's also so important to be able to go to somebody else and be like, hey, let's talk about this other thing, or let's talk about this theatre thing, and you can just give me your opinion as the person that you are, so yeah, to try and find people to be a part of your tribe that are similar to you but also are different, not too different. All human rights are very important. If you don't agree with me on those things, then we're not friends. But little differences like where we work and our background and stuff like that, I think those things are important to like make sure you find your tribe. And I felt at the beginning of lockdown, I already had a really good idea of who was part of my tribe, of who I would go to for certain things and who I talked to about other things. And then lockdown happened and the way I engaged with my tribe changed. And then the sort of tribe that I needed also changed. So over lockdown, I found myself reaching out to people who I wouldn't have spoken to before maybe, or finding people who have similar interests in me and bringing them into my tribe in my own way. Like your tribe is ever growing, just like you are. And so it's important to have that. And it's also important to know that it's okay if some people leave and some people and new people arrive, and people can come and go from that, but make sure you have that. And your tribe can be 3 people or 30 people, whatever works for you. Like there is no set number to it. During lockdown and being so surrounded by my thoughts all the time, I found myself really struggling with imposter syndrome and people asking me to do things and then me doubting whether I should be the person to do them because of my skills. I think that's, having that doubt is fine. Having that doubt of, am I the right person to lead this workshop? Am I the right person to talk about this subject? Those things are great. But doubting things like, am I a good artist? Should I be doing this, like blah blah blah? Those things are so not useful. So I do a little thing with myself where I play a game called What Gives You the Right? And it's kind of like a bit of an attack, but in like a really loving way, like something that like your sibling would say. So it's like, what gives you the right? So for example, I was asked to run a workshop, and then imposter syndrome reared its ugly head. So I did, what gives you the right? And I made a list of what gives me the right to run this workshop about well-being and mental health in theatre. And the way that this works is that you just have to be honest. You have to be really braggadocious, which isn't a word, but I love it anyway.
I love that. That needs to become a word.
Number one, thank you. But having to write them down to be like, what gives you the right to do this, meant that I had to kind of look at myself for what I am and go, oh, actually, yeah, what gives me the right to do this? All of these things, you know. I think the thing about what gives me the right is that sometimes it will tell you that you don't have the right to do that thing. So, you know, if I wanted to write a story about somebody with a mobility issue who grew up in Kent and was Muslim, I don't have the right to write that story because I just don't. I can't answer that question. And that's okay, because somebody else will have the right to do it, and you know, hopefully they'll be able to write that story. But
Yeah.
9 out of 10, if somebody's asked you to do something and imposter syndrome is in your head being like, you can't do it, play what gives me the right, and then and then you laugh at me, you're like, oh, actually, like, I'm amazing. What gives me the right? All of these things, bam bam bam. You know, also works in like not work related things, like if you're having a really rubbish day and maybe you don't want to shower, maybe you don't want to eat, or maybe you don't want to leave your bed, like, what gives me the right to leave my bed? I have flatmates who would like to see me. I deserve to get some food from the kitchen. I should stretch my legs. I need to stretch my legs. They deserve to be moved about, you know? Like, what gives me the right to do these things? Like, you already have it inside of you. It's just about getting it out and fighting beyond all of the things that say that you shouldn't, you know?
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
No
And I
worries.
just want to quickly ask you just about, you've adapted Audre Lorde's Your Silence Will Not Protect You. Can you just tell me a little bit about the inspiration behind that?
The inspiration behind it is just that I as a black artist, as a black mixed artist, you know, a lot of the work by amazing black female writers and black writers is more important now than I guess it's ever been. I mean, it's always been important, so, you know, what's the difference in it? But it was just really important, and actually I wanted to look into it, and I wanted to kind of discover it in my own way. And so I wanted to look at it, discover it, and make something that, that was my version of that. And I think, you know, these amazing writers, these black writers, these black female writers, these, you know, people who have come before me, I kind of want to bow down to them in some way, you know, and I can't necessarily just do that and send them roses or bow down to them in the street. So this is my version of that. This is my version of wanting to give thanks, and also maybe be a little bit angry about what's happening, or find joy in what's happening, you know, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so, so much for joining me today and sharing all of your wisdom and just sharing everything and being so generous with that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I had a really great time. Thanks so much. Black joy. Write something about black joy. Write anything about black joy. Just write about joy. something, anything, a sentence, a word, come on. You can't stay silent. So write something joyful about our lips and how they're like clouds and how they can create storms but cannot be recreated or captured or taken. Write something joyful about how our hair is the finest gold and how it twists and turns from single strands into chains that hang from our necks, our heads, our throats. Write something joyful about our skin and how it's made up of galaxies, of an infinite system of stars and histories, of a powerful and persistent black, of an all-consuming black, of a black that holds no lack of culture encased in its clasped hands. And last, write something joyful about how we stand. No matter the force that's pulling us down, dragging us down, holding us down, kneeling on our necks, it's always the same thing every day, the same thing over and over and over again, the same thing. And no matter how tired we get, it never stops, so we never stop. We just keep going. We keep the movement moving. We keep on and on until what we're saying is understood. We remind ourselves that we are clouds and galaxies and gold, and keep doing the things that we have to do every day so that we can get to see another day. Write about that. But first, write about black joy. Because black joy sings and dances and cooks and eats and paints portraits and writes poetry and ingests books and plays and films and TV and sows seeds and plants plants and grows gardens and goes on walking holidays in the country. And black joy composes symphonies and builds planes and roller skates and takes up space and invents the typewriter and invents the super soaker and invents rock and roll and runs countries and rallies communities and reaches to the edges of every island it inhabits and designs shoes and designs bags and designs gowns, lovely gowns, beautiful gowns. And black joy got that joke and belly laughed at it and read it again and laughed a second time. And black joy laughs until it cries, and it cries until it feels good, and it wins, and it makes history, and it survives another year. So write about black joy, because no one wants to read that. No one wants to see that, wants to hear that, or know that, or believe that it exists, but it exists. On joy.